COVID-19 pandemic is affecting 213 countries and territories around the world. More than 700,000 lives have already been lost. Where is God in a coronavirus world? To give us a perspective on this, we are joined by Dr. Chris Perumalla. Please join me in welcoming him to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Chris.
Well, thank you, Molly, for having me. It's a privilege for me to be here. And I trust that our time together would be a blessing to us and to the hearers as well.
All right. So why don't you share with us your perspective on this whole coronavirus world? What is happening? Where is God?
Yeah, before I answer that question, let me just, bust a myth that most people who are lay people seem to think that all viruses are bad. Now, if viruses suddenly disappeared, the world would be a wonderful place for a day or a day and a half at the most, and then we'd all die. That's the bottom line. And that's what was told by Tony Goldberg, an epidemiologist at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. A vast majority of viruses are not pathogenic. Let me just explain what pathogenic is. Now, a lot of these microorganisms interact with human beings, whether it is bacteria or viruses. Most of them are parasitic or mutualistic, meaning that they live within us, interact with us, and they don't do any harm to us. But some of them, they can become pathogenic and do harm to us. Let me give you a simple example. One my professor told me when I was an undergraduate, and the example is as follows. You take your lunch to work, and every day you share your lunch with your colleague, and they're enjoying this the lunch that your wife packed for you or you have packed for yourself, and suddenly one of the friends or colleagues who's sharing the lunch with you turns around and punches you. And that's not good. And that's exactly what these viruses or bacteria do. Some of them are living, most of them are living parasitically, mutualistically, but some of them turn around and hurt you. And that's when we call them pathogenic. So some of these viruses turn pathogenic. And without viruses, as I said, life would cease. Especially, it will become a problematic thing in the oceans where more than 90% of all of living material by weight is microbial. And those microbes produce half of the oxygen that is needed for our planet. So that's the most exciting thing about the viruses, that not all of them are pathogenic. Many of them are very, very, in fact, most of them are mostly parasitic or mutualistically living with us. Many of them are beneficial. So the question is, where is God in this coronavirus?
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to say that suffering is all around us. So there are wildfires, there are floods, there are hurricanes, there are tornadoes, there are earthquakes, as well as there are senseless shootings and lots of terror and wars. But again, if you personalize it, in addition to that, there is everyday pain at a personal, individual level, whether it is illness in the family, whether it is abuse, whether it is broken relationships, whether it is betrayal, whether it is sorrow, whether it is injuries or heartaches, or crime or death we experience. And people are suffering all around us. So you might ask and say, where is God in all of this pain? Jesus predicted this thing would happen. Unlike some religious leaders who wrote off suffering as evil, or suffering evil and wrote off evil and suffering as mere illusions, Jesus' suffering and death is a reality. In fact, Jesus went on to say in John's Gospel that you will have suffering in this world. But again, why suffering? No, obviously, I cannot get into the shoes of God to give a complete answer, but we can understand some things about suffering. The first thing that I want to point out to is God is not the creator of evil and suffering.
Absolutely. That's important to understand. Yeah.
In fact, Genesis 1:31 says that everything God made was very good. But if God is not the author of evil, then where did evil come from? No, God created
Good question.
God created us with free will so that we could love him, because real love always entails the ability to love or not love. So unfortunately, we abused our freedom by rejecting God's love and walking away from him, and that resulted in the introduction of evil in our lives and in this world that we read of and currently that we experience. So that's the first thing. God did not create suffering. The second thing is that though suffering is not good, God uses suffering to bring good out of us and to strengthen us. Notice it doesn't, in fact, in Romans, there is a verse, a beautiful verse. It says, in all things, God works for good to those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Notice it doesn't say that God causes evil and suffering, just that he will cause some kind of good to emerge. And it doesn't say that we will immediately or even in this life how God brought good out of evil or bad circumstances. And the third thing that I want to say is the day is coming when the suffering will cease and God will judge evil. Just because God has not eradicated evil does not mean that he won't act in the future.
Right. And that's, I think, really important. And a lot of people don't understand. In times like these, they begin to wonder, like, why is there so much suffering in the world, right? Where is God when it hurts so much? A lot of people ask that question because there are a lot of good people who suffer.
That's right.
So somehow we have convinced ourselves that if we're good people, then only good things are supposed to happen to us.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not a good supposition. It's not an accurate supposition.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. In fact, I know if we really look at the times when the kings of Israel disobeyed God and God sent them to captivity and into exile, there were a lot of good people there, but unfortunately, good people were also taken into exile because of the decisions and the evil that was done by the masses in the country. And one beautiful a parable that Jesus gave was that he talked about, he used a lot of illustrations that were relevant to people to whom he was preaching. And he said that a farmer sowed wheat and the enemy had come and sown tares in the midst of this wheat field. And the reapers came and said, should we really take away the tares? And Jesus said, no, let them just exist or coexist with the wheat. And at the time of harvest, we can separate the tares from the wheat. So there is a pain.
Because if you do that prematurely, I'm not a farmer, but I guess it's safe to assume that if you start to do that prematurely, you could harm the wheat as well.
Exactly. It'll harm the wheat. But I can tell you one of the things that God accomplishes his goodness through our pain. And the classic example that we see in the Bible is there's Joseph in Genesis. He was hated by his brothers. He was sold to the Egyptians and he was a slave there. And he was just succeeding in his business of just taking care of the household of Potiphar. But there he was wrongly accused. He was cast into prison. But God used all of this pain in his life, not only to build character into him, but elevate him to become the prime minister of Egypt. And when he eventually met his brothers, he said, what you meant for evil, God turned it for good.
Right. And I think that's a really good example, because as evil was happening and he was being caused to suffer, God was working alongside. The plan of God is always working, no matter what is happening in our lives.
No, that's absolutely true.
So, so it's good for us to always remember, I guess. I'm talking to my viewers, to keep things into the right perspective, that no matter what is going on, God is on the throne and all is well with the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, for all those people who have lost their jobs, that have lost their lives, a lot of things have happened to a lot of people. But then, this is the reality. The reality is we live in a fallen world. And Jesus never said that if you live in this world and the moment you follow me, everything is going to become hunky-dory and everything is going to be great, right?
Yeah.
But what I heard you say is that there is a time that's coming.
That's right.
When all of this will end, suffering will end, pain will end, death will end.
Yes.
Why don't you give us a quick perspective on that, because a lot of my viewers may not have ever heard of this, right? What is that time that we're talking about?
Our suffering is pale in comparison to what God has in store for us. God sent his son Jesus Christ to suffer for us. The most interesting thing is that God's ultimate answer to suffering is not explanation, it's incarnation. God sent his son, where God incarnated to suffer for you and me. So therefore he understands suffering. And the reason he suffered is that you and I don't have to pay the punishment for our sins, but thereby have access to God the Father and be spending eternity with him. And Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door of their heart, I will come in and dine with them. And he gives us peace that passes all understanding.
Wonderful. So on that note, we'd like to encourage everyone and say, you know what, and no matter what is going on, there's always hope. And we look forward to a better world. And even this coronavirus is not going to destroy us. And this is not the first national or international calamity that we have experienced. We've had many worst calamities that we have gone through, and we have survived. And God is still here, and he will continue to be here, and he will continue to help us. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you. And I just want to express my sincere sympathy, condolences, and understanding for those of you who have suffered because of a loss of jobs, because of the pandemic, or some of you may have lost your loved ones. Don't be discouraged. The psalmist says, God is my refuge, a present help in trouble, a very present help in trouble. So cling to God, cling to Jesus, and he will be your refuge in these difficult times.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
Please come back again and give us another encouraging message. We look forward to having you again.
Thank you so much, Molly, for having me.